The news hit the continent like thunder. Nnamdi Kanu had just been sentenced to life imprisonment.
No delay. No soft landing.
Before the dust even settled, he was moved straight to Sokoto prison in the far north. A place known for high insecurity, isolation, and silence. The speed of the transfer shocked many observers. It did not feel like a routine administrative procedure. It felt like a political message, loud, immediate, and intentionally designed to send a signal across the country. Nigeria was still shaking when the African Union received a special request. Some of Africa's strongest political figures wanted an emergency closed-door meeting. They were not coming to observe events from a distance. They were coming to speak, to engage, and to challenge the decision that had just pushed Nigeria into a new and uncertain chapter. These leaders knew that when a political conflict reaches the point of life imprisonment, the stakes are no longer just national, they become continental. Inside the AU building, the atmosphere changed immediately. People who normally moved with relaxed diplomatic grace now walked with urgency. Conversations were shorter, expressions were more serious, and every voice carried weight. Everyone understood the sensitivity of what was happening. A major African nation had taken a step that could shape its future for decades, and ignoring it would be irresponsible. Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso arrived first, with calm but intense focus. He was known for his sharp approach to leadership, his strong anti-imperialist stance, and his refusal to quietly watch injustice unfold in any African territory. His presence alone signaled seriousness. Traore is not the type of leader who travels unless the situation demands a strong response. Ghana President John Mahama walked in next. He carried the confidence of a leader who had watched Africa's political storms repeat themselves across decades. He had seen nations rise and fall based on how they treated their internal conflicts. He understood that justice, when mishandled, can become the seed of violence rather than peace. His voice was expected to carry heavy weight in the discussions. Shortly after, Kenya's William Ruto entered with the determined posture of a leader who has spent years studying the political consequences of extreme government decisions. Ruto is known for being direct, analytical, and fearless when diplomatic conversations require uncomfortable truths. His participation made the meeting even more significant. Finally, Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa arrived. Calm, measured, and strategic, Ramaphosa represents the voice of a man who has lived through the dangerous outcomes of national division. He understands the emotional power of political identity, and the disasters that follow when governments underestimate the intensity of public sentiment. His presence confirmed that the matter had moved beyond political commentary and into serious continental diplomacy. These were not small names. These were presidents, heavyweights, power brokers, and men who understood that silence, at a moment like this, could be interpreted as approval. And they were not smiling. There was no handshaking for the cameras, no long introductions, no ceremonial speeches. This was a meeting with urgency. The doors closed quickly, and the discussion began. One thing united them: the treatment of Nnamdi Kanu had gone beyond national politics. It had reached the level where Africa itself needed to express concern. The decision to sentence him to life imprisonment while his appeal was still active created a feeling across the continent that due process and calm political management were slipping away. Africa was watching, and these leaders were not prepared to pretend that nothing was happening. Behind the closed doors of the AU building, the first few minutes set the tone. No one danced around the issue. They began by acknowledging the reality: Nnamdi Kanu is not just any prisoner. He is a symbol. To millions, he represents identity, justice, and the demand to be heard. When a person like that is jailed for life, the public rarely reads it as a legal action alone. They see it as a statement of force over negotiation, confrontation over conversation. And that was the fear. The leaders knew Africa's history too well. They knew what happens when political disputes are pushed beyond the point where citizens feel represented by dialogue. They knew that conflict does not begin in the streets, it begins in the mind. Once people believe they have no path to justice through lawful means, they start searching for other paths. The transfer to Sokoto added extra tension. Many citizens questioned why someone appealing his judgment would be moved so far from his primary environment, family access, or support network. The distance itself felt symbolic. It suggested control through isolation. And Africa has seen where that path can lead. The leadership gathered in that room did not want war, unrest, division, or another long political crisis that spreads beyond one nation. They wanted to slow the fire before it reached a level that no one could manage. They wanted to speak before the silence became dangerous. They wanted Nigeria to recognize that some decisions are too heavy to handle alone, because their consequences do not stay within national borders. The clock was already ticking, and they knew it. For them, the big question was simple. Would Nigeria listen before events got out of control? As the meeting continued, one thing became clear. This was not just another quiet diplomatic discussion. This was Africa stepping in. Not to judge, but to warn. And to prevent history from repeating itself. When the meeting started, no time was wasted. There were no warm greetings, no diplomatic delays, and no effort to soften the atmosphere. Everyone in the room understood why they were there. The life sentence handed down to Nnamdi Kanu had changed the tone of political discussion across Africa. It was no longer a quiet matter for Nigerian courts alone. It had become a continental issue that demanded a serious response. The first point raised was clear and direct. The punishment was too extreme. Life imprisonment for a political activist with millions of supporters was not something that could be treated as routine. It was the type of decision that either calmed a nation or inflamed it. And from the signals Nigeria was already receiving, unrest was more likely than peace. Ibrahim Traoré was the first to speak. His voice was firm, steady, and without hesitation. He did not speak emotionally. He spoke logically, one careful sentence at a time. He said that Africa had seen the pattern many times before. When a government chooses the path of severe punishment instead of sincere dialogue, citizens begin to lose faith in the system. And once faith disappears, order becomes difficult to protect. Traore said that a government can use force, but force never solves the emotional cause of political tensions. He warned that the more people feel unheard, the more extreme their reactions become. He did not accuse Nigeria. He did not threaten. He delivered a simple truth: a country cannot imprison a movement. Individuals can be jailed, but the ideas they represent continue to move outside the walls. And ideas, once pushed underground, often return stronger. John Mahama, Ghana president, leaned forward as he spoke. He has lived long enough in African politics to understand how quickly a political disagreement can become a national wound. He reminded the room that Africa's past was full of conflicts that began with decisions leaders believed were small or manageable. But history showed that once you create a sense of injustice in the minds of millions, it becomes almost impossible to control how far that feeling will spread. Mahama explained that the Nnamdi Kanu case was not only about one man. It was about millions of people who believed their history, culture, identity, and political rights were not respected. For such a group, the imprisonment of their leader was not a court ruling. It was a message. And messages like that are received deeply, especially in a climate where trust between the people and the government is not strong. William Ruto spoke next, with his usual direct tone. He asked one question that cut straight to the heart of the matter. If the man is appealing his judgment, why move him so quickly, so far, and to a prison environment associated with high insecurity? To Ruto, the decision did not look administrative. It looked strategic, almost as if someone wanted Nnamdi Kanu positioned where legal and external access would be difficult. Ruto did not say this as an accusation, but as a realistic observation. Leaders deal with intelligence and strategy daily. When something happens this quickly, experienced leaders ask why. He continued by pointing out that decisions made in a hurry are often the most dangerous. Nigeria, he argued, needed to calculate not just how the government viewed the situation, but how the public interpreted it. Ruto said that governments do not fall because they make decisions, but because they fail to understand the reaction those decisions will create. Then Cyril Ramaphosa spoke. His tone was calm, but his words carried heavy meaning. He reminded everyone that South Africa itself had once faced political decisions that could have pushed the nation towards civil disaster. But the leadership at that time, despite its power, chose negotiation over force. Ramaphosa said that dialogue is not a weakness. Dialogue is a sign of a government confident enough to face the emotions of its citizens rather than rule them through fear. He then delivered the strongest line of the meeting. Africa cannot continue to handle national conflicts with punishment instead of resolution. If the continent wants unity, it must build it through respect, not retaliation. The room became silent for a moment. After hours of discussion, the leaders began presenting concrete demands. They were not suggestions. They were clear expectations. First, Nigeria must consider a presidential pardon for Nnamdi Kanu. Even the possibility of a pardon would send a message that the government was not closing the door on peaceful settlement. Second, the case must move away from the courtroom battlefield and into structured political dialogue. Courts can settle legal issues, but national conflicts require something deeper, mutual recognition. Third, Nigeria must take steps that lead not to increased tension, but to deliberate peacebuilding. The region was already emotionally heated. One more miscalculated move could raise that temperature beyond control. Fourth, a process should be established that gives all sides a voice. When only one side speaks, the conflict grows. When both sides speak and listen, the country breathes. These leaders understood something fundamental. No nation wins when its internal divisions are deepened. Winning a legal battle means little if it leads to losing the trust of millions. By the time the meeting reached its final quarter, the pressure in the room was unmistakable. Outside, the world continued with its daily business. But inside those doors, Africa's political future was being negotiated in real time. The leaders were not worried about public relations, political theater, or international appearance. They were worried about the real possibility of a nation sliding toward long-term instability. As the discussions closed, the message was unanimous. Nigeria must act with wisdom, not with speed. Dialogue must come before escalation. Leadership must be shown not through force, but through the ability to protect the nation from unnecessary conflict. The chapter ended with no applause, no smiles, and no relief. Everyone knew the next decisions would shape whether the story moved toward peace, or toward something far more dangerous. As the meeting continued, the tension in the room only increased. Every leader present understood that the decisions made in the next few days would not just influence Nigeria, they could influence the balance of peace across West Africa and beyond. The conversation had moved far beyond courtroom procedures. It was now about national stability, public emotion, and the risks that arise when a society feels unheard. One message remained constant throughout the meeting: Nnamdi Kanu was no ordinary prisoner. He represented something larger than himself. To millions of people, he symbolized identity, struggle, cultural pride, and the demand for recognition. When a leader like that is sentenced to life imprisonment and moved far away in such a swift manner, the emotional reaction does not remain quiet. It spreads. It builds in people's minds. It becomes a rallying point for anger, frustration, and fear. African leaders have seen this pattern many times before. They know that the political atmosphere in any nation is like dry grass. If a spark lands on it, the fire can spread before anyone has time to respond. And because of Nigeria's size, population, economic importance, and influence, any crisis within its borders can spill quickly across regional lines. That was the danger that hung in the air inside the African Union building. Ibrahim Traoré was the first to emphasize this reality. He reminded everyone that once a political movement begins to feel cornered, its strategies can change. If dialogue is blocked, people may look for other paths, including those that governments cannot predict or control. He stressed that leadership is not about showing strength by punishing opponents, but showing wisdom by preventing conflicts before they erupt. Ruto agreed and added something that changed the tone of the conversation. He explained that Kanu's transfer was not just a prison relocation. It was a political signal. In the world of public perception, every action communicates something. And the message many people read from the transfer was simple. You will be removed from your supporters, isolated, and kept where access is difficult. Ruto argued that such a move may win short-term control but often loses long-term public trust. And once trust is lost, restoring it is far harder than preventing its collapse in the first place. John Mahama then reminded the room of something even more critical. Political identity is one of the strongest forces in human society. When a group feels that their identity is under threat, they do not back away, they become more determined. He warned that no government, no matter how powerful, could lock away the identity of millions of people with a single court ruling. Legal tools can restrict bodies, but they cannot restrict emotions. And politics is driven by emotion far more than paperwork. Cyril Ramaphosa also spoke with a tone of seriousness. He said that history had taught Africa one painful lesson. When governments respond to political challenges with force instead of listening, they often create the very resistance they hope to suppress. He explained that one harsh decision can sometimes create 10 times more opposition than existed before. And once that opposition grows, the government begins to face not an individual, but a movement. After hours of discussion, the leaders agreed that the situation required immediate action. Not next month. Not after the next legal hearing. Not after tension exploded in the streets. Now. They drafted a joint message, calm in language, but powerful in meaning. The core points were straightforward and firm. Nigeria must reconsider the treatment and handling of Nnamdi Kanu. A presidential pardon should be placed on the table as a realistic option. Political dialogue must replace courtroom confrontation. Peace must be protected above political pride. And above all, the unity of the country must not be sacrificed in the name of proving strength. These leaders were not trying to interfere with Nigerian sovereignty. They were trying to prevent the country from making a mistake that Africa had made too many times before. They were trying to stop the future from repeating the past. As the meeting drew to a close, the room grew quiet. The diplomatic language had been spoken, but the unspoken truth hung thick in the air. If Nigeria continued on the path of force, the consequences would not be easy to contain. If the government ignored the emotional reaction building outside the prison walls, the situation could escalate faster than expected. If leadership failed to show wisdom, the country could face years, possibly decades, of tension, unrest, and political fragmentation. None of the leaders wanted that outcome. They understood that Nigeria was a key pillar of African stability. When Nigeria rises, West Africa rises. When Nigeria struggles, the region feels the shockwaves. And when Nigeria enters a political storm, the wind does not stop at its borders. As they left the AU building, each leader knew that their responsibility was not finished. This was not the type of meeting where everyone returns to business as usual. The next days, statements, decisions, and negotiations would determine whether Nigeria moved toward peace or toward something far more dangerous. Africa had spoken, not publicly yet, but clearly within its leadership circle. The message was simple. This was no longer just a legal trial. This was a tipping point. And the world was watching to see which direction Nigeria would choose.